Radio.
The more you can get the fuck out of the way as an athlete, to get your mind out of the way of your body, the better off you will be.
Hey y'all, welcome back to The Struggle. It's me, Ryan. I am your host, and I am really glad that you're here today. Thanks for being here. Hope you're having an awesome day, awesome week, awesome month. We're getting into the spring here in the Northern Hemisphere, for me at least, and oh, that's exciting. Good conditions outside, lots of freaking out that my training isn't where it needed to be to get me to where I need to be for these good conditions outside. It's just the classic rock climber's philosophy of freaking out and going out and having fun and then freaking out again. And I think that's on theme for our guest today, Francis Sanzaro, who is a writer, a climber, and a philosopher. And I'll tick through, some of his background here in just a second, but I want to preface this intro by saying that I read this book by Francis. It was given to me as a gift, and he's written a few books, but the one that I'm talking about right now is called The Zen of Climbing, and it's a small book that packs a punch. Every single page in here is basically dog-eared and underlined. I read it in a sitting, and then I've read it multiple times since, and it just spoke to me. It just rang like a tuning fork into what I've been thinking about and not thinking about when it comes to my climbing, my performance, how I think of myself as a climber. So much of us as climbers, our identities are wrapped up in this sport of ours. We identify as climbers, and when we're talking to climbers, we're talking about climbing stuff, and then we're not talking to climbers, we're thinking about climbing stuff. And anyway, this book just had like this kind of eye-opening, profound impact on me, and I reached out to him immediately and said, hey man, I really would love to talk through this. And this was, 6 or 8 months ago when I reached out. We just weren't able to align right away, but it was very much worth the wait because when we talked, I had already reread the book a couple more times and had more dog-eared pages and more underlined text. And we talked through all of that today. A little bit on his background. He's a hell of a climber. He climbs across all disciplines too. So I'm talking about ice, sketchy run-out trad, bouldering, sport. And he brings this perspective that he has as a philosopher and as a writer. He has his PhD in the philosophy of religion. And as a writer, he's written many books, but also was editor-in-chief of Rock and Ice, among other climbing texts for some time. And so he brings all of this perspective to this conversation and also this sport that we love, and really has found a way in this book, The Zen of Climbing, and also in this conversation you're about to hear, to kind of cut through the bullshit and just say, hey, what do we want to get out of this sport? And why is our ego so wrapped up into it? And if we want to get better, here are the things that can help us to get better. But more importantly, here are the things to bring more joy. And guess what? Bringing more joy actually will make us better. And so I feel like he was kind of cut through a lot of my facades, if you will, as a climber. And he talks about why having a grade as a goal is not a great idea. He says that to the guy who did an entire series last year called The Road to 13A. Zen is a word that we bring up a lot because that was in the book, and he knows a lot about Zen. But really, these are tools, right? It's not just of the Zen philosophy, but tools for us to be able to manage fear, whether we're bouldering or on route climbs or really run out on a trad route, or as an example that he gave, on some really sketchy ice climbs where the stakes could be death. And not only managing fear, but then harnessing our mindset to perform at our absolute best. And kind of paradoxically, that means not chasing flow. And what the pros do, many of the top performing pros, and he talks about Adam Ondra and Alex Honnold and Hazel Findlay and some others in this conversation here, what they're doing in order to perform at their best and what's very different about often the things that they are doing and the things that weekend warriors like myself and maybe you who are listening are doing. There's little tricks, there's little ideas and concepts in this conversation that Francis offers up that I've been implementing in my climbing and my training lately, and predominantly my climbing outside, how I look at the day and my goals, and when I'm tying in and looking at a route, what I'm thinking about doing, these little things that have had truly a profound impact on my climbing, not only on my performance, but also on my enjoyment of the sport. So I'm going to get out of my own way here and just start this conversation with Francis. On the backside, I'll tell you a little bit more about what's going on in my world and my training and climbing and everything else, but I'm just too excited. I want to get into this conversation right now with the Zen master of climbing himself, Francis Sanzaro. I'm so excited to connect, and This has been a long time coming. I was given this
I know.
book of yours by my sister-in-law, and we went and stayed at her house. She lives in North Carolina, and she like gives little gifts.
Yeah.
She's very thoughtful, little gifts for everybody when they come visit. And so she gave this to me, and I just couldn't put it down. I was trying to unplug for the few days that I was there, and this book really helped me to do that. I was off my phone, and I wasn't, worrying about the podcast. And I just like tore through this thing, and every third page is dog-eared. So I've got a lot that I want to talk with you about. But first of all, I just want to congratulate you for writing a book. You've written multiple books now at this point, but it's no small feat. So congratulations on it.
Yeah, it is no small feat. I hear that, man. I'm glad you liked it.
Yeah, dude. It was really great. And, I found myself when I was reading it, like nodding my head a lot and underlining like a lot of things. And then I'd get to a different section and I'd be like, I don't know about that. And I'd throw some question marks. And so it was an interesting journey of, I think, some insightful, like kind of eye-opening perspectives, and also stuff where I was like, oh, I don't know if I agree with that. Or what was he going for there? So I think this conversation, I'm really looking forward to. Now I get to crawl into the mind of the author here, because it wasn't like I read it and I was like, yes, I get it. There's like stuff that I was confused by and stuff that maybe I don't agree with, or at least I have some resistance for. So I'm excited just to explore it.
Dude, press on. That's awesome. Yeah, like be like, I'm not sure, like that's great. That's good stuff. Like I am, as someone who writes a lot, like I've given up, like on any notion of trying to be right, like it's just like you put stuff out there, and that's the way it is, man.
Sure. Cool. So, well, yeah, I'm thrilled to be having the conversation here. Before we dive in, before we really dig in and kind of peel back on this thing, I just want to hear a little bit about your climbing. And let me start with the absolute most general question one could probably ask, but I always find joy in the answers, which is, why climbing, Francis?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's probably like a deep question and a shallow answer to this one. So I'll give you the shallow one, is that when I first started climbing, I was like a gymnast, And so I also played soccer and stuff. But, when I first started climbing, I really, I just understood, I guess, what the sport was asking of me. I had kind of the baked in strength, right? So like I didn't really have to overcome like power deficits early on.
Cool.
And so like I kind of got it. I got it from like a balance. I got it from like a mastery perspective. Like you really need to try to master something again and again. Like as a gymnast, like you're doing routines like again and again, And as climbing, I learned like I really enjoyed that, which is I still carry it 30 years later as just like a relentless projector, like I'm like, man, I want to like rehearse and get that thing going, So, and also climbing, there were like girls at the crag, kinda. And at a gymnastics place, there are girls, but you could like never talk to them,
Sure.
So that's the shallow answer. The deeper answer, is probably something like I love to feel the energy of the natural world, out there in the wild. And I get a lot back from that. I still do. Like, again, it's just something that's been just a recurrent theme in my life. Not sure why that is, but, whether I'm just trail running or ice climbing or alpine, whatever, just being outside is really where I feel like I need to be. And so, yeah, that's probably what climbing just fit me practically. And then spiritually, I guess you could say philosophically, it just kind of made sense.
Cool. Well, I appreciate that. I think we'll probably touch on some of those themes as we dig in here. And you do have a background in spirituality and philosophy in your studies in university. Obviously, you've been writing for quite a long time within the climbing and adventure space, as well as now these books and advocacy work. And so lots to peel back on here, but I think we'll enter into this conversation as we do through the lens of struggle. We're going to be talking a lot about mindset in this conversation. And before we get into your areas of expertise, I'm curious as a climber, where you struggle in your mental game.
Yeah, I like that question. I think I struggle with trying to do too much. I think that I am, kind of beholden to something that I constantly have to chip away at and question, which is basically just trying to train too much, trying to do too much, trying to run on my rest days, trying to do a route when I shouldn't be, like, I should be taking a rest day, things like that. And I think, I deal a lot about this, with this in the book. At least I try to talk about it, is slowing down can actually be a form of speeding up in a very odd way, and I think we're trained to just constantly be productive. I mean, everyone knows it's like, oh, it's produced, it's this, it's optimized. It's like all these things, let's just get better all the time. And I was kind of like victim to that. And I went through a lot of years of like injury cycles as a result of it. And once I finally like really saw how I was getting injured, why I was getting injured, and I was like, I broke the cycle, and so I struggle with that. Did and still do, but I kind of laugh at it now. It's just like, I'm like, there he goes again. He's trying to like, kill himself, or trying to like cram like 2 months of training into like a week, and it's just not sustainable.
Yeah,
man.
at least you can recognize now. I think you're right. Many of us climbers are a bit overstoker, highly motivated, try to optimize, and whether that's in our climbing life or maybe just in other endeavors, I'm certainly kind of fit that bill as a creative, doing a podcast and YouTube and having a real job and having a family, and then also trying to climb the hardest stuff I've ever climbed. It's
likewise, same here. Exactly.
Yeah, birds of a feather. And I did recognize quite a bit of that in this book here, but how nice that you have been able to recognize that pattern or some of those early signs as that's starting to take hold and you fall into maybe some of those old habits and then be able to break them. I'll be curious to pick your brain on that a little bit. And, the main tool that you're using, if you will, at least through the context of this book, is Zen, this practice or philosophy of Zen. And so for our listening audience, as well as for myself, whether somebody's read the book or not, maybe give us a little 101 of Zen, and then I think we'll start to enter into some climbing specific areas here. And I did get quite a bit of questions for you as well from listeners, so we'll start to weave those in as we go.
Yeah, that sounds great. Okay, so where to start with Zen? I think a good place to start is that it's probably not a religion the way people think about it. It's really a set of philosophical ideas and kind of like principles. And so, when people say like, you practice Zen, how does that look for you? Like, I don't really attend a Zen class. I don't do any of the things that most people associate with spirituality. What I take from Zen, and that's just kind of me. There's a lot of people who would do that, wear the robes and things like that. No, that hasn't been my path. For me, I just took, at an early age, the principle of looking at one's mind clearly, carefully over a long period of time. I took that very seriously. And, not a lot of traditions do that. So I guess that's kind of like a Zen thing, is like, look at what's going on inside of your own frickin' brain, look at it really carefully, look at it with bravery and courage and sobriety, and go from there. And like the rest will kind of be history, right? All these things will open up. If you take that one principle and you just dive deep into what your brain is doing, what your mind is doing, where your consciousness is, how your fears are coming, how your hopes are sometimes fears as well, or projections or insecurities, right? So, that to me is the main principle of Zen. Zen is part of Buddhism. And obviously one of the main tenets of Buddhism is self-awareness, to look at oneself. And so, it's super interconnected with the Buddhist system there. But, Zen is like a tradition that's really flourished in Japan. It actually started in China, came to Japan, and it's really just flourished there. And that's why people kind of associate it with its own little thing, because it's got its geographical place. But, Zen is really, for me, and that's going to be my gloss on it, it's about finding the practices and the methods to look carefully at one's mind. And when you do that, a lot of doors open. A lot of doors close too, but those doors should be closed, if you catch my drift.
Sure.
But a lot of things open up. And so that's what Zen is. And that's what the Zen of climbing is about. It's looking at the climber's mind, right? I'm a climber. I've been at this sport for over like 30 years now, like multidisciplinary. And I feel like I speak for a lot of climbers in the sense of like all attachments and overtraining, botched in sequences, like all the shit that we bring to our climbing really like kind of fucks up the game, it spoils it. And so that's kind of, I try to unpack as to what we're bringing to climbing, because I come from experience, I've been through it all, like literally. Probably.
Yeah, I really appreciated that throughout this book, you bringing in a lot of the experiences and some of the revelations that you had throughout. A concept that you introduce early on in the book, and I believe this is a Zen concept, and then carry throughout, is this idea of big mind and small mind. And I'm still not sure, even after reading the book a couple times, if I truly understand big mind and small mind. And you'll come to a place and you'll be like, well, that's doing this is small mind thinking and doing this is big mind thinking. And so Again, for those who maybe haven't read the book, or for me, who maybe am still a little bit hazy on what those two things are, is there a way for you to be able to distill big mind and small mind definitions down for me?
I can give a shot at that. And you're not alone, Ryan. It's like slippery stuff, right? So it's really difficult kind of concepts. And I feel like, it's kind of the experiential concept.
Right.
Like you'll get it. You're like, oh, like, fuck, that's what it is. It's kind of not conceptual stuff, I would
Sure.
say. However, let's think about it like this. So we go about our world on a daily life, making decisions based on basically, our sense of identity. Ryan is this kind of person. He does this kind of rock climbing. He likes this kind of food. He's a father. And so basically all the decisions that you make on that daily basis are kind of gauged against that center or that locus of energy that you have, that self-identity, right? So, I'm not going to get on this climb. I'm going to do that climb. All those decision-making, the analysis, the hopes you have, the fears you have in life, they're all kind of based on, in that sense. And the sense of self is where that comes from. And I'm not going to denigrate that sense of self because we need it, but that's the gravity of it. So small mind is like kind of a smaller locus of attention, focus, things like that. Big mind is something that starts to reveal itself the less you're able to, or the more you're able to detach from that sense of self. And this is like kind of stock and trade language in meditation circles, but it's not something like you're kind of here nor there. It's something that you start to inhabit a space where you can really start to see what small mind is doing with a lot more clarity. And when you start to see that with more clarity, that means kind of by default, you're inhabiting big mind more and more. And it's something that we all probably experience throughout our daily lives or weekly lives, but we may just not know it. We may get like a really sharp piece of insight about what we just did. And we're like, oh my God, I can't believe I just had that thought. Like, what an asshole I am or something. Or like, I can't believe I just considered doing that, and this really sharp moment of self-reflexivity where you can see what was happening in your mind. You're kind of like in a big mind place at that point, but we lose it really quick. We're out of it very quick. And so, I think over years, I've been able to, build up a place where I can inhabit that like self-awareness for longer periods. And so that's where I think big mind becomes more clear to me. Is it's just a place where my default stance when I'm looking at Francis and all his ridiculous like little things about who makes him and his history and, all that stuff becomes kind of more clear. And it's clear because I'm able to step outside a little bit and inhabit a different place. But that takes a lot of work. That's like that's the path of meditation, right? That's the path of self-awareness, self-improvement, if you want to use those words. I don't know. But
it sounds like there's an element of observation, of being to observe one's self and maybe our emotions, our feelings, our thoughts, insecurities, that kind of the little monkey mind, I guess, being able to observe that. And then also an element of non-attachment, if I'm using kind of a Buddhist word here, but essentially trying to not attach to an emotion or kind of what our ego might be, our thought might be, and trying to observe without having any sort of, I don't know if I'm using the right word here, but essentially like an angle or, a judgment about something, but like truly just observing. Is that kind of what big mind would be? Because I'm trying to, I guess the connecting fiber that I'm trying to do here is then how do we essentially apply that to us as climbers? How are we small-minded climbers and how are we big-minded climbers?
Yeah. Okay. I'll just ground it in climbing then.
Sure.
How about this? All right. So as typical climbers, we get attached to climbing like something harder. Let's say you're a 12A climber, or let's say you're 11 plus climber and you want to climb like 12A, like, man, I want to get my first 512. And that's a big fucking deal for a lot of people. Same 13, 14, whatever. And so we think if we look really carefully at what's going on, the reason we're chasing that goal is because we think we're going to be a changed person when we get that goal. We think other people are going to view us differently. We think we're going to view ourselves differently. We think we're going to have some bit of happiness or some bit of success now that we've done this thing. That's literally why we do that. And what happens when you start to like really interrogate that thought, okay? Like when you're like, am I really like going to be a better person after I climb 512? Am I really going to be like a happier person? Are my friends like really going to like think of me as a more awesome guy? And the answer to every one of those is no. And I mean, like, I feel like I speak from experience. I've done a lot of things that would in my life that I thought would really take me to the next level, or I would be this kind of climber. When I did my first like 514, I'd be like, all right, fuck yeah, like I am this kind of person. Or when I climbed my first double-digit boulders, I'd be like, all right, like, I've arrived. But you never arrive, because the second you arrive, you're always like, what's the next thing? Like, you never just like stop and like, oh, okay, like let me just soak it in and like I'm here, And if you look at athletes, if you read athletes on accomplishments, which I did writing this book, like time and time again, a climber's going to say, a mountaineer, when I finally like topped out on the north face of X, like there was nothing there for me. Or Michael Phelps, when I finally got like those 8 gold medals, like I got depressed, I just was not who I thought I'd be. Or Alex Honnold in a recent interview, I love that he's like, yeah, he says this exact thing. He's like, yeah, I really thought that like when I soloed El Cap, I would just like wake up and be this new person. He's like, turns out I'm just the same guy. And so small mind is caught up in all that visualization, right? And thinking we're going to be X, Y, and Z. But then I think when you can start to really look at that and observe that mind, like train working, like, like, you start to criticize that, and that's be like level 1 would be, I'd be like observing that, just being aware of that thought process. And then I think as you get more and more, I don't know, using metaphors down the line, or you inhabit a space for longer, then I think the unattachment to those things starts to happen. And then you realize like, I still maybe want to climb my first 14A, but I know I'm not going to change as a result. And I know that all these things are not going to happen. So what does that do? Are you left with, well, shit, I'm not going to do it? Typically, no. You're just left with, well, isn't that interesting? Maybe I should just focus on the climbing as opposed to who I think I'll be after this. And when you do that, then you're really starting to rock climb, Then you're really, you're doing moves at that point, and you're really inhabiting movement in a deeper way. And there's a beauty there. There's a real subtle kind of mysticism of the body and the environment that happens when you remove all the shit that you put between you and your climbing. And it's amazing, man. It's amazing. Yeah,
well, let's peel back on that a little bit more. And I'll come from a fairly fresh personal perspective here, where I spent the last 14 months trying to climb my first 13A, and I just did it a few weeks ago. And
nice work.
Yeah,
dude.
Thank you.
Love that.
I'm psyched. And
yeah,
I derived a ton of pleasure from the pursuit. Like, oh, here's this thing. And I don't know what I was telling myself. I probably should go back and maybe examine and think internally about like, oh, did I think I would be a different person? Or how did I imagine I would feel? No doubt there was a bunch of stuff wrapped up in this label of being a 513 climber and achieving this thing and all of that. However, I don't know if it was, the actual thing that was driving me, but like I did love having this goal that seemed very hard and at first like almost unachievable, like, oh, like how dare I try to do this thing? And then as I got closer and closer, delighting in getting closer and closer. And so for me, like the goal, I know a lot of coaches would say, you shouldn't be motivated by a grade, you should be motivated by a route. And ultimately I was motivated by the route, but initially I was motivated by the grade, to be perfectly honest. And it was probably a fairly like egotistical or base thing to be like, oh, 13A. But I got like a lot of psych out of training for this thing, and would having kind of quote unquote big mind or something like that, would it mean not doing that, or would it just mean not trying to think that I would feel different after I did the thing?
Great, dude. That's an awesome firsthand account, and good job on this end. I love that.
Psyched.
That's a big one. So, my take on that would be something like, looking at the motivations behind climbing is kind of like looking at the code, the inside of your iPhone. Like no one really does it, but when you do, you're like, wow, isn't that interesting, right? Like there's a lot of shit going on there when you really look. So you're right in the like that we just don't often think about that. What I think is the case is I'm glad you got pleasure from the process and getting stoked on the route. That to me feels like really honest and like the right place to be, because if you're not enjoying what you're doing at a deep level, then you shouldn't do it. You shouldn't do anything, in my opinion, And so that to me all feels right. What I would say is, what I would want you to like maybe think about is like, okay, so you really like focused on that grade, and that was a thing for you. I would wonder like, okay, so if instead, that was the end of the rainbow, it's like maybe, you start to think about, I want to just put the best performance possible I can into this route. And whether that's every day is a new day, and whether that means clipping the chains or not, I'm going to try to perform my best. It's like, so don't try to clip the chains, because when you try to clip the chains or try to do a route, you actually stack the odds against your favor, because you're putting a lot of pressure on yourself to do a thing. And one of the biggest things that most coaches will tell you about is internal pressure that we put on ourselves can be overwhelming. So I would say, try to release yourself from that pressure that builds up from that, right? And one of the best ways to relieve yourself from that pressure is say, I just need to have a good performance, whether that means doing the route or not. And in my own experience, I've done harder climbs in a lot quicker time and with a lot more joy throughout the entirety of the process when I've just focused on trying to put in a good performance. And we can talk about what a good performance means, but it's my contention that climbers will excel at a much better rate. They'll enjoy the process deeper along the way if they focus on trying to tune their body to be proud of a performance, not a great achievement. Because now I know you're thinking, I'm going to do another, or I'm going to climb 13B. Right. Like that's how we think. But probably the quicker way to that kind of mastery is to, get rid of all those things and to really focus on what it is that it means to climb hard and what it means to have a really great mindset in climbing.
This episode is supported by our friends over at Rungni. They've been such an incredible supporter of the Struggle Climbing Show for well more than a year now, and that's how I can make this show and pay the bills. And guess what? Now you can pay some bills with Rungni as well. I might be putting myself out of business here by sharing this, but they just launched this new community over on the Club app, and that link is right there in your show notes. And if you are a creative type, and if you want to earn some extra money on the side, you can hit that link, sign up, and become an ambassador for Rungni. You'll get your own discount code that you can use and share around your climbing crew. But then beyond that, there's all sorts of really cool climber-related challenges in this app, like filming yourself at the gym doing the boulder problem of the week with your friends, having a good time. And then when you share that, you get to earn points. You can earn money or you can earn free gear just for sharing this content out there and also just doing the thing that you love, which is climbing. So if this is something that interests you, check out Club. That link is right down there. And if it doesn't interest you, but you still want to score a discount on some awesome Rungni chalk and gear, well, then you can use code STRUGGLE for 15% off store-wide plus free shipping on a ton of bundles. And by using that code, it helps me to keep making the show, which is awesome. Well, there's something a couple things that come to mind here that I underlined in reading this book that I think come along these lines. And one was on this projecting chapter, and you posed this question: does it matter if you fail? And if it does, why? And you suggest that we kind of ask ourselves, and I think that was on the heels of essentially suggesting that it doesn't matter at all, with a concept that you present called cosmic insignificance therapy. And those are some big words that basically means that nothing matters or climbing doesn't matter. And so, I'm curious. I'd love for you to just expand on both of those things for a second here, if you could.
I mean, think about it like this. I oftentimes think about like your climbing matter. Like your climbing matters to you. And maybe I'll use myself an example because whatever. So my climbing really, matters to me, right? There's a gravity of significance around Francis for my climbing, right? Now, if let's say I take it to my wife or kids, it's kind of thinned out a little bit. Like I come home and they're like, how was your trip? And I was like, great. And they're like, cool. And they're watching TV. Right. They're like, fuck you.
But it's literally my experience every time I come back from the red. I just did the hardest thing ever. And they're like, good job. And go back to the thing. Or I fell at the chains of the hardest thing ever. And they're like, oh, sorry. And go back to their thing. That's about it.
Yeah. So, and then like your girlfriend or wife is like, oh, good job. Like, but like, can you clean that shit up in the backyard?
Right.
You're like, oh, okay.
Totally.
Right. And then your buddies may send you a text, nice job. But then outside of that, think about your uncles or whatever. Do they care about your climbing? No, they don't care. Think about you like the person down the street. Do they care about your climbing? No. So in other words, like your climbing really matters in a very local way. Ultimately, it doesn't matter. Like we're not curing kids' cancer. It really doesn't matter. Like we're creating these games for ourselves, for self-meaning. And we have to really be aware of that, because what that self-meaning does, that importance for climbing, it actually chokes us up. It makes us worse climbers. And that's the irony. Like, it's because of all the self-definition and all the pressure we put around us. That's the stuff that actually doesn't enable us to climb that well with fluidity, with intelligence, sensitivity.
Let's explore that a little bit, because I'm curious how that, in your experience, makes us worse climbers. Because I do think there's like maybe a side to the coin to explore where when we really want something, we're super focused on it. We get disciplined. We train really hard. We maybe like try to get our game face on. And I see some climbers do that. Some climbers don't. Some climbers are maybe a little bit more kind of laissez-faire about how they'll take on something super hard. Chris Sharma maybe comes to mind. But then there's other climbers, maybe it's Adam Ondra or some of the really hard boulderers that like will try to like really get amped and psyched and get in the zone, kind of, if you will. And you've got chapters on zone and flow and these kinds of things. So I may be jumping ahead here, but expand on that if you would a little bit. How does wanting to do the thing actually prevent us from doing the thing in many instances?
Yeah, good one. Okay, so one place to start is, I think we're talking about the question of motivation. And I think that we're assuming that most climbers have, or most athletes have, pure motivations, like they're coming from a love of the sport. It's definitely not the case. And I read a lot of coaching literature. I heard a lot of coaches, even NFL and, NBA, like they're like, one of the biggest things that athletes suffer with is motivation. They don't feel like they're motivated by the right things. They feel like they're motivated by a fear of failure.
Professional athletes? Yeah,
a lot of professionals. This came up time and time again, was the fact that most athletes wanted to be driven by something internal for a pure love of the game, but they weren't, And I was like, that's really interesting, So, like whether it's like fear of losing. I mean, a lot of athletes, I think Apollo Ono, the famous speed skater, he famously said, like, I just was scared of losing the whole time. And it was terrible. He's like, I never really enjoyed my sport, because I was just I just never wanted to lose. And a lot of climbers are like that, we're scared of falling, or we're scared of feeling like a failure. And so our motivations aren't always clear. So what happens, I think you asked the question of what happens when our motivations aren't clear? What happens when we put all this stuff in between us and our climbing, right? Like what happens? I mean, I think a lot of things happen. Is one, we are much more liable to putting pressure on ourselves, which manifests when we're climbing to like a nervousness, nerves, right? I mean, most climbers before they try something hard feel very nervy. They're like, okay, they feel it, right? And it's really toxic. It's not good because it's really hard to handle in the moment. And there's no quick fix for that. There's only a deep fix for dealing with nerves. You've got the feelings of failure when like all the times you didn't do the route. And so you put all that pressure on yourself. And I mean, climbing's lame in a great sense because we succeed so few times in the classical definition of succeeding. You know what I'm saying? Like if you're like, let's say you're Andre at the top of your game, how many times are you going to succeed from an objective perspective? Is he going to climb 16A? Probably not, And so his notions of success, I would say, are very different than what most people think they are. Like he's got a very good grounded sense of what it means to be a performance-driven athlete. And so, like manifests in distraction, overtraining, all these other things. And I start the book out with an example, which to me really like kicked it off. It was like, I was trying to do a route in my local valley here. And it was something I'd saved for a while, 13A. I'd tried it for a while. And I was like, man, I'm going to save it for the on-site. I'm not a 13A on-site climber, but I was like, fuck it. I'm going to try, like we're going to see what happens. It's my style. And I tied in, it was a great day and I was ready to go. And I realized I was super nervous and I was like, shit, like how long have I been doing this sport? Like, why am I nervous? Why are my palms sweating? I can just feel how this is going to go. This is just not going to go that well. I fell on the route one time, then I took it to the chains. And I realized when I got down to the bottom, I was like, the main thing that got me was that I just had visions. My brain was at the chains and my body was en route. And that was a terrible place to be. And I realized, why did I do that? It's because I wanted it too bad. I expected it. I thought I could do it. I had all these thoughts small mind stuff.
Right.
And I was like, fuck it. I'm going to try a trick that I heard Chris Sharma talk about one time. I was like, I'm just going to tell myself I cannot do this rock climb. I'm just going to say, this is just a beta burn, like you're not going to do it. So don't worry about it. And I really kept that up. I tied in again, and then did it very easily. And I was shocked. It was so much just be there. You're not going to do it. This is just a burn. And I just ripped right through it. And I was like, it took me back, I'm like, isn't that interesting? Like, how did that happen? What happened?
Yeah. In what did happen? Because I've noted this, the Sharma example, I noted this, and it was like, it was a very kind of, there's some dissonance on this concept for me, because I can totally see, in fact, I experienced this. So when I sent my longest standing project out here at the Red, it was my first Red Point go of the season. It was the first time I was trying it from the ground that season. And I tied in and I was just like, I'm just going to check where my fitness is at. Like, it was very much like I'm not going to do this. I was very close. I fell on the last move multiple times the season prior. And then on this one, I did a bunch of low pointing and I think I was more fit. There's a lot of things that came into play, but whereas at the end of the prior season, I was like, this is a send go, here we go. I'm ready. Let's go. On this one, it was very much like, I just even said to my belayer, I was like, just a fitness check in. I'm just going to climb until I pop off. And then all of a sudden I was clipping the chains. So I see that side, and I'd love to explore what we think that does to the mind-body connection. But also on the kind of other side, why there's maybe dissonance is, I also think that there are times where if you tell yourself I'm not going to do this, are you giving yourself an excuse to not try hard? I'm not going to do this. And I've seen friends, I've belayed friends who are like, oh yeah, this is just going to be a little beta burn. And then as a result, some little thing goes funky and they're just like, oh, just take, or they'll just come off because they don't have that kind of warrior send mentality. And yeah, I'm curious your thoughts on those kind of two sides of the issues, if they are the same issue. I'm not sure.
Good, insightful question, by the way. That's awesome. That's a real good, articulated question, Ryan. Here's what doubt does. And I wouldn't advise people to constantly go out and tell yourself you can't do it unless you're the person that is an overconfident climber and who constantly thinks they need to believe they need to do something in order to do it. Because I can tell you, you don't need to Musk can do this. I fill myself with air and stoke and the good vibes and the light. You do not need to do that to climb hard. And I think that to doubt, the hack that I had used that day was a desperation strategy. And I wouldn't say I use it anymore, but it's a very good tool for people who get to the bottom of a climb or know it's coming and they built it up to a point where it's so heavy they can't get out from under it. And one way to get out from under it is to just constantly and try to really do the opposite thing, which is to add some doubt.
Okay.
And so, I wouldn't recommend it as a global strategy, but it definitely can come in handy. And, what you're doing there is you're basically allowing your body to do what it knows how to do. You know what I'm saying? Here's the funny thing about the body is that all day as we speak, it's regulating, it's sitting upright, it's going to walk down the street. It's going to do all these things. And you don't need to have this calculative mind telling it what to do all the time. It is a wise animal. And the more you can get the fuck out of the way as an athlete, to get your mind out of the way of your body, the better off you will be. And studies have shown that overthinking and calculation while doing physical activity decreases muscular exertion. It actually decreases practically your ability to exert muscle fibers. And I don't know the mechanics of how that works, but there's been studies that shown that, for instance, if you're lifting and you're trying to do math problems, they actually studied this. You can't bench as hard as you could by doing math problems if you just tried to, it's just the way it is.
I noted that. And I think the figure was 13% that you put in the book. There was some sort of study that was done where it was, if you're exerting effort mentally as well as physically at the same time, the physical performance, I think mental performance dropped as well. I don't know by how much, but the physical performance the drop was higher. It was 13%, which was at least cited in this study, that's a lot. I mean, 13% is a freaking lot. If you're trying to do a limit project, you're not going to send.
You're not going to send. Yeah. Especially at your limit on a hard lock off or something, right? You're not going to do it. There's been other interesting studies, basically studying why apes are so much stronger than humans. And for instance, they did this funny study where they tested like a bunch of college football guys, like big guys, 250, right? Against like, a 200-pound ape, who's like only like reward was like some shitty pellet of food, And like this ape could just like rip 800 pounds on one arm. Okay. And these guys like were doing like 300 max. So same body weight, same kind of like rough, whatever DNA structure. So what's going on there? And the scientists kind of basically said that humans, we have a lot of gray matter in our brains, which when it comes to firing our muscles, basically the system gets too much noise and our muscles aren't able to fire at their max potential. Part of it is because we have a lot of fine, like, muscular, like neuro control that like those animals don't have. Like we can thread a needle and they can't, for instance. But I think the study's pretty conclusive is that too much thinking and too much in overthinking is really a detriment to the body. Now, the second part of your question, the flip side of the coin it had something to do with, say it again, Ryan.
And I've experienced this, and certainly there's some people that I climb with that are kind of notorious for this, which is you're essentially giving yourself too many excuses on a route before you climb in. I'm not going to do this. Oh, that's not the day. The conditions aren't good, whatever. I'm second day on. And then they're like, it's just, you call take at the second bolt, or maybe you don't try hard when a sequence doesn't go as planned. You're like, oh, well, that didn't go how I wanted it to. I'm just going to hang here for a second. And so it's like, you don't go into the route saying, I'm going to give this thing hell, know?
Yeah. Okay. That's a good subtle point. I think when I talk about doubt, I would probably more focus on, okay, so you maybe if in this particular hack, and I want to highlight it's a small hack, but you would say, I just need to climb this route to the best of my ability without any expectation of getting to the top. And so I wouldn't say that entails like, all right, fuck it, like take, like whatever. I think you still need to push through uncomfort. You still need to let your body do its thing. But in the end, I think that's probably a healthier thing by letting the body fail than having your mind really just kind of try to whip it up a route. Like, come on, like all that self-talk is not healthy for athletes. And that's a pretty well-studied phenomenon too, is, what that does. That creates valuation. That creates the sense of you as a failure. You did bad moves. I'm a failure because of that. And there's nothing good comes out of that cycle of feeling like a failure, So yeah, I think there's some nuances there to that particular thing, but I would say, in any case, we shouldn't be easy on ourselves, like we're climbers, we have to try, and like a so-called Zen perspective doesn't mean you don't care. It just means that you're kind of unattached to whether there's particular outcomes. Like you have to like try in the classical sense, like the body needs to move, it needs to go up, you need to chalk up, you need to do all of those things, but you don't need that like extra, like I have to try really hard. Like actually you're probably going to fall more often as a result of thinking you need to try hard than not. And if you don't believe me, just go out on the crag sometime and start experimenting with this mindset. Start being like, okay, I'm going to see what this guy's all about. Here's a decently hard route for me. And I'm not going to try to get to the top. I'm just going to try to do every move as good as I can. I'm going to try to breathe. I'm going to try to make good decisions. I'm trying to listen to what, holds are telling me to do. My guess is you're going to climb a lot better with a lot more flow, a lot more confidence, ironically enough, and you'll probably enjoy it a lot more.
Yeah, dude, I really love how you just phrased that in kind of the goal being, I'm going to try to do every move as best as I can. There's something like that just kind of like hit me like a bell. There's something about that. And so let's talk about kind of practically speaking, maybe how that looks or how that feels for somebody who's, I think you've experienced this probably more than me, although certainly I've been on routes where it's just felt flowy and great. And we'll talk about flow in a little bit because you're kind of tough on the concept of flow. And so I want to tease that apart a little bit. But the experience of not thinking about the goal or the end game, the goal being the chains, if you will, or the top of the boulder, but rather just kind of experiencing movement in its more pure sense and not trying to kind of overthink it or overplan certain sequences or moves, essentially letting the body do the thing. And so I do like that, like maybe stepping up to a route, taking a deep breath and just saying, okay, my goal here is to make every move as good as I can. Maybe you find yourself at the top of the route, maybe not, but at least you can feel good if you've done X amount of moves as well as you can. But what does that experience feel like to you? And then what are you doing on the route? Like, where is the mind on the route in that scenario?
I mean, the experience is of pure rock climbing and not noise. So for instance, it's like hearing beautiful music and then hearing your kids yell in the other room and it's driving you crazy. Like there's a qualitative difference when you are climbing with an undistracted mind and you're really present there as opposed to not. And that the difference, again, it's putting your hand on sandpaper versus silk. There's a quality of experience there that's hard to describe. And when you think about climbing too, like if you break it down, trying to get to the top doesn't help you do the moves. Like to do a route, you have to do the moves, period. You'll never climb a route without doing the moves, right? So, okay, what helps us do moves better? What helps us do moves better is to be present with those moves in a very honest, present way, because a lot of climbers fall because of bad sequencing, bad beta, you botched the foot, you got nervous, you overgripped, you undergripped. And a lot of times we panic, right? And so therefore we're not present. You want to avoid all of those things. You want to avoid panic. You want to avoid the feelings you get, the highs and lows from like having bad beta or having bad conditions, right? You want to like take out all the noise and just be present there with that rock climbing so you can really listen to what climbing is telling you. A good analogy might be in like dance. In grad school, I read a lot of like dance theory. And, dancers talk about their sport in a lot of ways that climbers do. And if you imagine you go into like a dance, right, and you see someone really beautiful and graceful on stage, I can guarantee they're not saying, okay, right foot up, left foot up, like must flow. They're not doing that. They're in the dance, and that's a prerequisite of their sport. They cannot be, if they're overthinking it, their body will be very far behind, or their mind will be so far ahead, it's just going to be really ugly, right? The same thing goes with climbing. If you're at a point where you're just having to overcalculate everything, it's going to manifest itself in the flowiness of your body. It's going to manifest in stiffness. Climbers, we stiffen up, when things happen. And so, that's, I'd say, what it feels like to actually be, when you're there in that moment, it feels like you're actually just climbing and you're not doing it for something else. And I think, a lot of climbers experience that, but in kind of moments, because we're always fighting, we have this thing going. And I think to not be attached and let me step back a bit. I don't think you want to be attached to any one thing in your climbing. You don't want to be attached to being super relaxed all the time and just whatever. That's not the point. The point isn't being attached to super aggro, because there are points where you have to try really hard. Let's say you're on hard monos at Wild Iris or something, and you really need to just do it. You should employ that mindset, but you should also reset it really quick. Okay. And then, what is required of me in the next move or in the next sequence? Because any particular attachment to one type of mindset, whether it's try hard, don't try hard, be super chill, none of those are going to work in the end. And it's the freedom to toggle between all of them that makes a great climber. That's where you're getting mastery. And again, look at Adam. He's a fantastic example. He can speed up. He slows right down. He can yell, scream, and then he'll climb above bad gear for 20 feet in some sketchy place. I mean, Adam grew up as a really bold climber. I think a lot of people don't know that, but he's got a resume, like an Alps resume that is crazy. He was young and doing hard alpine routes with 40-foot runouts at 14, So he's got the mind, and that shows in the sport climbing that he has the ability to stand out a little bit and control himself.
Quick shout out to our friends over at Scarpa, who have been sporting the struggle here for a long time now. And then me as a climber, I've been climbing in Scarpas for over a decade. My very first pair of climbing and approach shoes were Scarpa, and I love them so much. And I want to tell you about two new shoes that they just came out with. First, the Instinct VSR LV. You've probably seen Nathaniel Coleman and Alex Puccio talking about these. I posted a picture when I got mine. They're purple and black and white, so already winning. But what's the LV stand for? Low volume fit. So if you've got a narrower foot or you like a really technical feel to your toe box and your heel, the low volume is probably the shoe for you. It's also got this extra patch of toe rubber on the front with an aggressive texture and extra structure in the heel for excellent heel hooking ability. This shoe's super technical. It's really beautiful, and it's got that extra sticky VSR rubber on it. And then this new hiking and approach shoe that they just came out with, the Rapid, are so good. The LT's the lightweight version with recycled content and a knit upper, and then the XT is the extremely extremely abrasion-resistant version for the harshest alpine conditions. It's got a suede upper, also recycled content, and they both implement the Active Fit and Active Impact technology in those. You guys, Scarpa's been sustainably making the best adventure footwear since 1938, and they support me over here at The Struggle. Show them some love over at scarpa.com. That link is right there in your show notes. Do you see, you're talking to a weekend warrior here who has not achieved the level of mastery in movement or strength or tactics or technique as anyone even close to the people that you cite in the book. And so for those of us mere humans who are trying to go for our first 5'11" or our first 5'12" or our first V2, and we're experiencing this en route, we get gripped because we're above a bolt, or it's a slabby top out on a boulder, or we just find ourselves thinking like, oh, I just went through the crux. I've got some hard climbing left, but there's the chains, and that small mind, if you will, starts to become pretty loud. We're not at the point in our climbing where we are masters, right? Yeah. Are there experiences that you've had or in talking with others or tips that you might suggest to help us get out of that small mind and back into a little more of that kind of big mind or flowy state?
So I'd say, for better or worse, let's call big mind a muscle that you can get into. Let's just call it a brain muscle. So, the more you work that muscle, the better it is, right? The more control it has and things like that. And so meditation, if I'll say anything that is hands down an incredible practice for any human being, athletes especially, it is the ability, to sit and observe your thoughts. That's at the backbone of this book. It's something I take, it's one of my 3 pillars. Or, one of my pillars I take to the crag every single day, every attempt, is the ability to breathe and breathe carefully and intentionally. So, I think if you develop a deeper practice like that, taking it to the crag, what you'll learn is that you probably are going to have less of that monkey mind, as they call it, or those less intrusive thoughts that really take over the body. You're going to have those interjections less frequently, and they're going to have less power over you. And that's a powerful thing. And so maybe on route, the constant thing is to okay, come back to the climbing, come back to the climbing, come back to the climbing. All right, I'm at a route, I'm sketching this clip. I'm pulling out 3 things of slack, to make a clip or whatever. Fucking relax. You're getting pumped. Climb up 2 extra feet, clip at your waist, get to the rest, really reset. Focus on your breath, focus on your breath. Focus on the moves, and focusing on your breath, what that really does, it allows your brain to kind of flush a little bit, get rid of those distractions, kind of take away the hold it has on you, and try as best you can to reset. Beginners, climbers, they freeze up a lot. I'm in the gym, I'm constantly observing this, especially I was writing this book, and the littlest thing can set them off. And when they're set off, it's really hard for them to recover. And clipping and falling are classic things, or getting far above your last clip are classic things that paralyze beginner climbers. It can paralyze veteran climbers, you know what I'm saying? But here's the funny thing. If you're mindful of your breathing or if you're climbing, you literally can't get into a panic place. You cannot, because you're not in a place where your mind's allowing panic to come in. You're just focusing on climbing. And then if you focus on that, by the time you're going to be at the clip, it's not possible to have both. You can't be mindful of the climbing and panicking at the same time, or having that fear. So I would say that's, something I would really recommend people take. And starting, practically speaking, start at your warm-up. Maybe just use your warm-up as a great example, whether that's your 5'10", is just do it with as much mindfulness as you can. And you'd be surprised how smart the body is when it's trying to move, without trying to have all this conscious oversight. It's remarkable. And, I bring out a lot of quotes too, just so, it's not me. I bring out a lot of quotes in the book from top climbers who are always saying, my main goal is to get my mind out of the way so my body can just do its thing. Whether that's Nathaniel Coleman, Segrist, Andra, it's kind of unanimous, right? Well, not unanimous, but it's an important thing. I would say it seems to be well supported, is that, at one point you really have to let the body do its thing. And breathing is a really good art for that, or mindful climbing is a really good art for that. That doesn't mean you're flowing and you're just trying to flow and be graceful. No, that's not what it means. It doesn't mean you're trying to be anything. You're trying to just climb with efficiency, right? That's what it means.
Yeah, that is, because at least at first when I hear the concept of like, oh, like climb and focus on your breathing, then my mind goes to, because I'm just like so analytical, I think, is like, okay, well, how should I be breathing? Am I breathing too fast? Should I try to slow down my breath? Should I do a box breath right now? And now I'm thinking about how I'm performing as my breathing. And so if I'm understanding correctly, that's not the suggestion. The suggestion is just note what's happening with your breath as you're climbing. And sometimes it'll be faster because you're exerting a ton of energy. And sometimes maybe it's chill because you're at a good stance and you're shaking. But just if you are focusing on what's happening with the breath, and I guess to some extent, maybe the movement or the feel of the rock or any number of things that maybe are happening in that moment, then you're not thinking about, oh, how do I do this sequence coming up? Or am I scared? Oh, I'm pretty far above my bolt, or the crux is coming up and that's where I always fall. All the other, I guess, invasive thoughts that could come in don't have space because you're just trying to focus on what's happening in that moment, which is just breathing however you're breathing.
Yeah, don't try to breathe in a certain way. Of course, if you're out of breath, maybe try to calm your breath down. But in general, you're just noticing your breath. And you're trying to be aware. I mean, here's like, a classic thing is try to sit down on the couch and try to focus on your breath for 10 seconds, just 10 seconds. I guarantee there's no one listening to your podcast, myself included, who can do that, right? You're going to have an intrusive thought that comes up at about second 3 or second, and then you realize, oh shit, I was on my breath. Let me try again. Like, you're not. So imagine what our bodies are trying to do while our minds are constantly coming in and out of like awareness when we're trying to climb over a 5-minute period. It's a disaster, right? So the more you can improve about that particular focus, the better you'll be, because breath isn't the end goal. What breath does, it allows our body to really be the driver, and that's kind of key. As athletes, our body is our medium. There is no question about it. And if we can't have a very clean interface between our body and our minds, then we're doomed to failure, or at least we're not doomed to achieve the potential we can achieve. Before I forgot, you asked for an example it was a great example. Just last weekend, I was climbing Uray, doing some ice climbing, and I haven't really done dangerous types of climbing. Ice climbing, it's got pretty high risk stuff. And so I just lost both my parents in the past year to disease. And so it was a really rough year. And so I realized I had to really slow down kind of my dangerous climbing. I had to put a pause on it for a bit. So I took a trip out there to climb some ice. First time in a year, I did a lead. I was like, okay, my nervous system is good. I'm okay, But when I topped out this route, I basically had one ice screw, and this route kind of kept going, and I didn't know it kept going. And it was really bad ice, and it was really dangerous. And I was like, fuck, shit, this sucks. I was like, I didn't want to be put in a really marginal position, But then I was like, this is what's happening. So just focus on the climbing. I was like, all right, I have 30 feet of basically X climbing. If I'll fall, that would have been the end of it for sure. I would have been, left my kids without a dad, most likely. And it was like, hey, I had to make every swing just perfect. I can't get into a fear zone. It's not going to help me. And I had the ability to do that. And that was I wasn't happy that situation happened, but I was like, okay, I kind of called on my skills a little bit. I kind of practiced what I preach. You know what I'm saying? So it happens to me all the time in climbing, trad climbing, ice climbing. I feel like that's the nature of climbing. That's one of the marquee elements of our sport, is that we're asked to go from safety to fucking danger, and we have to manage that really quick. If you're a hockey player or a basketball player, there's a pretty even experience. Surfing, I think those guys can have moments, but our sport is really defined. I think if you do a lot of the disciplines, it's really defined by an up and down, be on 5'8" in the mountains. This has happened to me, and it's a sunny day, and all of a sudden, 10 minutes later, I'm 30 feet run out from a bad pin, and I'm getting hailed on in Rocky Mountain National Park. And it's super grim. I'm like, oh man, lightning striking all around me. But that's our sport, right? That's it.
Yeah. Well, you climb, I think, in hairier situations than certainly I do. Although I found myself in pretty gripped. It's relative, right? So what may be very comfortable and safe waters for you, 15 feet above a bolt. For me, I might feel like I'm 40 feet run out, just because that's my experience. I haven't exposed myself to more of that. And so I think the concepts that you're talking about and the practices here for handling those emotions and thoughts when they arise, I think are applicable along that. And I'm curious, in the example that you just gave, when you were climbing in some rated X stuff on ice, how often were the invasive thoughts coming in? Like, how was it one thing and you're like, okay, I need to get serious and just focus on this movement, and boom, you were at the top? Or was it a constant needing to check back in with the breath or the moment because you were like, oh shit, I'm another 10 feet up? Like, what was that experience?
Yeah, good question. It was in and out. I probably only popped back into maybe awareness 2 or 3 times over the course of 7 to 10 minutes,
Yeah.
you know? And it was because maybe like I realized, so you're climbing, you're like focused, you're like, it's kind of like the zone type mentality. And then I'd swing and I realized I was climbing on like eggshell ice, which eggshell ice means like there's the rock and then there's like 3 feet of waterfall and you're climbing like 2 or 3 inches of ice on the veneer outside of it. And so you have the potential to just fall right in, like the whole thing just like woof. And that was the situation I found myself in. So I'm swinging and my tool's just air and I look through and it's just water running. And I'm on like this much ice, 4 feet out from the wall and I'm just on a shell. And at that moment, I'm like, shit, like this is bad. Like I have one screw, the screw's terrible. It's like, this is really bad. But I was like, that thought doesn't help me.
Right.
Like that thought adds nothing to my ability to get out of this situation safely. So that was a well-trodden mental pattern, I'm talking about. I was like, okay, that thought doesn't help. I'm going to let that thought go and I'm going to focus on my swinging and my feet and so on.
Well, what you just said there, I think, again, is poignant. That thought doesn't help me because we kind of think that it will for some reason. Or like if I'm looking back at some of the experiences I've had, I'm like, oh, okay, well, let me think about this. Okay, well, I'm 15 feet above and my belayer's got some slack out and I guess there's certain thoughts that could help you because you'd be like, hey, take in some slack. But like, I guess you're saying in a scenario where essentially dwelling on the reality of the situation doesn't make the reality of the situation any better, then that thought's essentially just getting in the way. It's preventing you from a better outcome.
Exactly, Ryan. Exactly. And you take that to sport climbing, high-end sport climbing. This may not be particularly relevant at grades below your level, but when you're trying to climb your best, that's when those thoughts really, because that's when the stakes are higher. You know what I'm saying? So that's where that really helps into like your first 13A or 14A, because you're on route a long time on most of these things. And when you're trying to climb your limit, you're making consequential decisions, common sense decisions all the time as a climber, over gripping, under gripping. These are all the little things add up to ascend or not. And so the more you can realize like that thought's not helpful, the more you can tell, your mind to be like, get that thought out of the way really quick. Let the body do its thing, let the muscles do its thing. Let muscle memory work. Let focus happen. Put your mental bandwidth into something productive, not something not productive. And as climbers, I don't think we really know, and part of the reason I wrote this book is I don't think we really know what are unproductive thoughts versus productive thoughts. Like we know what, like fear's not good, panic's not good, nerves aren't good, but we've like never really had a literature that really talked about these in a deep way. And like, hey, here's how I think you can kind of master this stuff. Here's how you can never feel like a failure again in your climbing. Like here, like truly, like here's a method where you can kind of have drive for a long time and get over injury cycles and never feel like a failure. And here's a really joyful way to climb, but also helps you be a climber. But so yeah, coming back to your point, that's right. I mean, I think that decision tree where you can say that thought adds no benefit to my climb. If you can see that really clearly and kind of swipe it out of there, man, it's amazing what that'll do.
Yeah. And what that brings to mind here is, correct me if I'm wrong, because I want to tease out this concept of flow, which, as I mentioned earlier, you're a little bit tough on in the book. As I was reading, because I'm like, oh, like it's all about flow. We're getting to Zen. That's like flow. And then you're like, flow should not be the goal. I'm paraphrasing there, and I don't even know if that's accurate, but I want to talk with you about that because it sounds to me that if we're focusing on breath and movement and getting out of our own way and the body's just doing a thing, that kind of sounds to me like the concept of flow, where you're just all of a sudden you just kind of did the thing and you're like, oh yeah, I did the thing. And It's kind of fleeting. I can't, there's not, it hasn't happened to me all that much, but like, it's pretty rad when it does. I'm curious, like, where do you stand with flow?
So I think if it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, it probably is. And so what you're describing is kind of a flow experience. And you're right on that intuition. Here's where I think the problem comes. And I'm speaking to like social media users, people who are on the train of like, the 5 hacks to get better flow in your life, the 5 things, there's a cottage industry in intellectual capital behind chasing a flow state. And what we do is we set ourselves up as athletes to try to set ourselves up, like try to chase the flow state. So it becomes like an attachment in a lot of words. We're like, oh, if I'm like, I need to really get in the flow state to perform my best. I think a lot of us think that. I can tell you that's not the case. And I bring out in the book, some of the best sends in climbing have been like, wow, I felt like shit. It was rainy. Like, like we talked about earlier, like I didn't feel good. I was 3rd day on. Like literally, these are from the words of the top climbers. Like I cite Stefano or Sean Rabitou. Like these are guys climbing at the peak of climber. And they're like, I felt like shit. So what's going on there? Of course, there are some climbers who climbed their best in a flow state. And we can't deny that or whatever that means. But I would say as someone that gets asked about this a lot from climbers or about wanting to improve, I would say, don't chase that. Don't chase flow state or don't even try to set yourself up for it. Focus on what we've talked about. Focus on trying to be in that moment, right? Trying to do the thing, what you need to do in front of you. But also, I would say even more important than trying to get rid of obstacles in your climbing or get rid of things that annoy you is try to go right towards the annoyances. In other words, try to really embrace when conditions are really bad and try to get into a good mindset when things don't feel like they're going your way. That is a better skill because what that does is that's going to give you the grit to keep going and to know, we talked about earlier about not giving up. Like when you are like really familiar with uncomfortable situations or when you've dug yourself out of a hole a lot, you are going to just keep going all the time. And if you're the kind of climber that's like, oh, like I screwed up that sequence take, I mean, go ahead and take a rest. But I can tell you that the top climbers in the world, they're not saying take when one thing goes bad. They're not even saying take when a lot of things go bad. They're just like, something went bad. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to see what happens. I'm going to keep going. I screwed that part up. Didn't that suck? Or I didn't get the rest I wanted. But they're able to reset their minds really quickly so they don't get into those, negative feedback loops of like, oh, you're not going to do it. Like you're too pumped. Like all that self-talk comes up, I think, with, mid-level climbers that really sabotage us in the end, So, I feel like I read about flow state, and I feel like I experience flow state a lot, but it's never something I'm like aiming for, to be honest. I just feel like, being present in your climbing is going to take you there, and that's cool. And that's great, but get attached to being a better climber, being more present and then being able to deal with adversity better. I think that's a better skill to have. And so that, again, it's just a matter of where you put your energy as an athlete, and what I think our sport is made of. I think our sport is made of fine-tuning details. And I think we oftentimes give up as climbers when those details don't feel perfect. Like we're kind of perfectionists, and we're overly analytical. That didn't go right. But we need to no, it's fine because climbers are out there doing the hardest things in the world with very bad conditions or not feeling well. So it's possible for us as well.
Yeah, totally, man. I really appreciate that. The real world examples from, some of the best climbers in the world, but also just bringing it down here for the rest of us that, I think flow, if I'm kind of digesting this the way that I think flow isn't the goal. Flow isn't a necessity to be able to do the goal. Flow is a byproduct of just climbing and being in that moment and focusing on those movements, maybe the breath. And so maybe flow happens, maybe flow doesn't, but it's not like you need flow to attain the thing. And that's I think a very valuable practical perspective to have because it doesn't happen all the time. And you're saying for you, because you're not expecting it or needing it, it, as a result, kind of paradoxically happens more often maybe than it would.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Flow is a really elusive state. That's part of the mythology. It's kind of mythology around it, right? Like flow, even John Gill, foundation or one of the, founders of bouldering brought chalk to our sport, climbed like V9 in 1959, like a total fucking boss.
Gymnast.
in shit climbing shoes,
Right.
Me and him went a lot back and forth on this one, actually. Like we had a lot of personal correspondence and things like this. And he like really chased flow state. That was like his thing. He chased a feeling of lightness. And I was, well, that's good. But if you're trying to climb harder, like you probably shouldn't chase anything. You should be really open to having non-flow states and just getting up something,
Right.
whatever. If your goal is to chase flow state, then you should just chase flow state all the time. But if you want to be a better climber, you can't be attached to anything other than that which enables you to get to the top, And so yeah, he kind of was like, yeah, that's right. He's like, he kind of agreed. Like, yeah, I that was my goal. My goal wasn't to climb V12 and back in the day, which he probably was able to. My goal was to chase the flow state. And I think there's a big lesson there, because I can tell you, like, if you look at top climbers, a lot of them are sketchy. It can be sketchy climbers. The technique that comes out, you're like, oof, that's rough,
Right.
But it's still like some guy climbing V17. So you don't need to be in a flow state. You can still tic-tac your way and sketch and fumble your way up something really hard, and be okay with that.
Yeah, cool perspective. And that does bring up this idea of goals. And I want to talk about goals because I've been very goal oriented and motivated, and again, gotten quite a bit of pleasure out of it. I find it much easier for me to do a gym session when I don't feel like doing a gym session, or getting out of bed a little bit early to go do some cardio when I don't feel like it, if I've got that goal that I'm psyched on, rather than just like, the pleasure of moving my body. You note something in here on goals, and I think it's kind of wrapped around like a fear of failure or failure chapter, where you say failure occurs in small mind, have goals, just no end posts. And so it's not that goals are inherently a distraction or a deterrent in our climbing. It's the end posts, or is it how we treat the goals? I'd like to talk a little bit about goal setting, because I'm trying to figure out what's my 2025 goal. I just did my thing. And so now I'm like, what's the next thing? And so I want to try to enter into my goal setting with maybe a fresher perspective.
Yeah, that's good. That's real practical. So I get asked this a lot. I was on a podcast, an ultra runner, and he really loved the book because he's helped him deal with a lot of these same things that climbers deal with. And he was big on goals. He's a coach as well. And he talks about goals and performance and outcomes and, what's the best way to triangulate this? And I think what I wouldn't advise anyone is to just have no sense of what their future entails for their climbing. I don't think that's really feasible. In the back of my mind, I, for instance, want to continue to climb without injury. I want to continue to push myself, my ability as a climber. I want to continue to climb hard. I enjoy projecting a lot. I want to become a better climber. I want to be able to read stone better. I want to become better at all the different things. I don't have goals of I want to climb a 13D this year. I want to climb a 14 in a couple. I don't have those goals. Could that happen? Yeah, sure. That could happen along the way. And that's probably a realistic end goal of some of that stuff, right? Is those grades. But my focus is improving as a climber and continuing to find a lot of joy in climbing. What are we doing? If we're not really enjoying our thing at the deepest level, then what are we doing, right? We have to really be enjoying the sport. And I think anything that you can do to increase your enjoyment of the sport is going to increase your performance in the sport. I believe those two are really paired. So you talked about goals. I consider a bar graph, you've got a lot of different columns that motivate people. And so there could be great, one bar graph could be I need to climb 13C. And that's the highest thing motivating them. And then maybe down there, they'll say yeah, I want to be a better climber. That's great or something. But that's a little lower. And another person may say I don't know, I want to overcome my fear of this. And so that's another thing. And I think if, people learn to reprioritize what it means to be a good performer, then all of those things will increase, because performance is really the thing that undergirds them all. You're not going to be a better climber if you're not a better performer. You're not going to do a better grade if you're not a better performer. You're not going to overcome any sense of fear if you're not a better performer. And so, all right, if we can agree on that, what does it mean to be a better performer? Okay, it means to, basically be able to do moves again and again and get to the top of something without falling. Okay, so then you take it back again. What does that mean? What is it? How do you do moves better? You do moves better by having a better sense of the language of rock, right? You being a better climber allows you to do moves better. What does it mean to, taking it back again, have a better understanding of the language of rock? That's where we're getting to the deeper stuff of mastery of stone, right? It means a lot of things. It means you can look up at a climb and read it with more intelligence. You can put yourself there with enough foresight that when you're there, it feels comfortable. You can look at holds with clarity and you can say, okay, like, that's a side pull, not a Gaston. I need to go left, not right, or something like that. Or I need to not overgrip in this section. So all of those little things enable you to be a better performer, which enable you to be a better climber, which enable you to do moves better, which will enable you eventually to get to your goals quicker. Because if you reprioritize the goals, like the number, it's like a weird thing, It's like hard to like explain. I don't know, maybe I could put an analogy. It's like going out running. Like I just want to run in the most beautiful place like ever, period. Like if you try to do that, you're going to self-sabotage it. You're going to bring so much like weirdness to that situation. Maybe this isn't the best example, but we're a surfer. I just need to go out and try the most difficult thing ever. And there are a lot of surfers that do that, but you're taken away from the experience of surfing when you're just doing that. And I think climbers we're on sports of landscapes, like it's like we're out there in the wild. There's gym climbers, of course, there, but like we have to attune to something different other than this arbitrary thing that this natural environment is giving us. And to read stone really carefully, we need to be really humble and aware of what, rock is requiring of us. And so I think about that. So like, the oars aren't out of the water, coming back to the original question. Don't like take the oars out of the water. And it doesn't mean you're like, oh, I'm just going to surf around on 510 for the rest of my life just because I'm going to soul surf kind of Zen thing. Like that's not the case. The case is just reprioritizing what your goals are. Your goals to really increase your mastery as a climber, to move better with confidence or whatever that means, with fluidity. And if you do all of those things, everything else will like take care of itself. I believe that.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. The surfing example was really poignant there because although I don't know how I'm coming from a place of ignorance here, because I guess they do in surf competitions, surfers get points and this kind of thing. But I was in my mind, I'm thinking like, well, it's not like a wave comes and there's like a floating icon above it that says this is a 514 wave or something, but like we're able to do that because our landscape is more solid than like a surfing landscape. So I wonder, have you talked to surfers? I wonder if surfers struggle with the kind of ruminating mind like we do with the performance anxieties and measuring yourself against one another because I climbed this and you climbed that and all that. I wonder if that's a similar issue in surfing or if because of the ethereal nature of a wave, if maybe they're saved some of this torture that we put on ourselves.
Yeah, no, it's a good example. When I wrote a book called The Boulder back in the day, or, it just got re-released, but I read a lot of surfing literature. I grew up kind of near the ocean and I can get on a surfboard. I'm not very good, but I know what it means to ride a wave. And what I found was that it was also during this time that climbing was about to go in the Olympics a little bit. And there was talk of it, right? And there was talk of surfing going to the Olympics as well. And there was a huge outcry from like surfers because they're like, oh my God, they're gonna like, it's a point system now. Like all people are gonna chase is like difficult waves and it's just gonna be judged like so much for the experience of surfing. Like that's gonna be dead. It's like, it's just gonna be point chasers and all this kind of stuff. And in a lot of ways, that's kind of borne out to be the case. Like surfing's really changed. The way sponsors have really changed. And, like there's now a different kind of like motivation, I think, for younger surfers out there. They're also really good surfers, by the way, doing that kind of stuff, not to take away from difficulty level. But I would say that something happens when you're learning to surf a wave, when you're trying to really inhabit something really deeply, and you're putting this thing between you and that medium. And when you put something between you and a medium, it's never going to be good because what you're introducing is just blockages from you really trying to understand what this art form really is or what this medium is really about. And also, like, I'll back up a little bit. You can be a really good rock climber and be totally attached to grades and just like, you can get really far in rock climbing, if not the farthest in any sport, by doing everything I'm saying you shouldn't do. You know what I'm saying? But here's the difference, is that there have been athletes who've done that their whole lives, and they're all on record, and there's a lot of them saying, man, was that a dumb mistake? Like, I really regret that, I like did not enjoy my sport. I did not. This is Michael Phelps in the Way to Gold documentary. I didn't know who I was. I burnt out, so there is a way and a strategy to get to that top of that game by being fully attached, by grade chasing, the whole thing. That's a well-trodden path. Does that lead to longevity? Does that lead to like a real sense of deep joy in what you're doing? A sense of personal, presence with the sport? No, it doesn't. It's going to take it away, in fact. And so that's kind of where I come to with that question of goals is like, let's talk to people that have won 50 gold medals, let's hear what they have to say. And a lot of these, you could say just fully objective, beating the competition driven athletes all suffer from that kind of like burnout, lack of motivation, feelings of low self-worth, because they put their self-worth in that achievement. And like that achievement fades, like you got to retire, like someone's going to one up you. And so therefore you're going to be crushed. It's how that works. And if you can avoid that, man, you're going to perform longer and just find a lot more joy. And you're going to become much better at what you're doing because you're just with it more in a more like intimate way, It's like meeting like dating or meeting someone, like you want to be with them, right? You're not trying to be like in the room and like being distracted and being text. Like to really get to know that person, you got to be there. You got to be present and pay attention. And it's the same thing with sports,
And then to achieve, that was really beautiful. I appreciate that. To the path to essentially trying to achieve that rather than be wrapped up always in the outcome, always in the goal, whether it's a gold medal or just a number grade or a thing on the tension board or whatever, is to set goals that are more about mastery, to set goals that are more about incremental progress on how you feel on something. Can I still have a finger strength goal for my hangboard? Like what does goal setting then look like for you or for others who are trying to embrace what you just said so that we do have deep fulfillment and joy from every moment of our climbing, not just the fleeting few hours after we do the thing?
Yeah, I would say, so those kind of like hard goal setting, I think should be controlled or be subservient to the the main goal, which was to climb better, be a better performance, to be a performance-oriented climber. And what that means is your goal is to perform better. It's not like, when you stand underneath a climb, it's like to say like, man, I wish I could do this is not the right attitude. The right attitude is I need to make good decisions and I need to get into a mental place that allows me to make mistakes and get over them very quickly. It allows me, like that should be your goal. And Jerry Moffatt actually has a really great book on this. He found like this book by Lanny Bassem, he was like an archer, like, this guy as in like Olympic arrow shooting, right? And Jerry Moffatt was like a competitor back in the 80s. And it was mildly successful. By the way, Jerry Moffatt's like a famous British climber, just in case some of these young guys don't know.
Absolute legend crusher.
Legend crusher, right? Like one of the big guys, one of the big names in the sport. And he read this book about, the goal isn't to win. This is what Lanny Bassem's book about. Like the goal isn't to be a winner, it's to have a winning performance, right? And Jerry Moffatt's like, holy shit, like what the fuck are you talking about? Like I just always wanted to win. I wanted to be the winner. I thought that would help me. And this guy's like, nope, trust me. So Jerry's like, well, I'm going to give it a try. Like, let's just see what this guy's about. So he does this and he like goes on to win every competition he enters for like years, like first place, just immediate change. What did he do? He's like, I'm not after trying to be a winner. I'm trying to figure out how to get myself to what a winning performance looks like. And that's not the same for everybody, but I've tried to sketch out what a couple of those elements would be of a winning performance, but he just changed his mindset. Now, that doesn't mean he's not going to still try to do 159 on the campus board or, have training goals, but the training goals are now serving the larger goal, which is to have a winning performance. Because of course, to have a winning performance, you got to have good endurance, you got to have strength, you know what I'm saying? All of those things that you mentioned, training goals really feed that master goal. And Lanny Bassem's book, I think it's called The Winning Mind, or maybe we can put in the show notes. It's fantastic. And it's about archery, but you're like, this is the book that woke Jerry up. And I read it too. And I was like, yeah, I see why that is, because it really just like a shift, you know, you're like, okay, like that's right. And now Lanny Bassam is like a very famous athletic coach. He's a very well-known, well-respected coach, and he sticks by it, you know, back then. And another great book is called The Inner Game of Tennis, which is considered like one of the first books ever written in deep performance psychology. And I read that book and I was just like, yes, I discovered a little late while writing the Zen, but I was like, man, that is a fantastic book as well. It really started performance psychology in a deep way. And ironically enough, he comes from meditative tradition. And, you know, he talks a lot about avoiding self-talk. And there's a lot of things I kind of riff on in the book is like avoid self-talk, which means avoid when the calculative mind comes up, it always comes up in thoughts and you're talking to yourself. And that's always destructive for athletes. So, those are great books.
Yeah, well, I'll absolutely link to those books in the notes, as I will with yours, because I think the Zen of Climbing now belongs on the same shelf as those books there, Francis. I mean, man, I could talk for another 4 hours, but like my brain is about to explode. I'm so excited about the topics that we covered here. And this is one that I'm going to listen back to multiple times, just as I've read your book multiple times. And for those who are listening, it's not a very long book, but it hits you. I mean, like the concepts hit you. And fortunately, you were very gracious in chopping it up into like very short digestible chapters. Like each section is like a page and a half.
That was intentional. I was like, I got to make this shit.
Totally. It's like, okay, I can read a page and a half and it's going to blow my mind and then I'm going to fall asleep and I'll do it again tomorrow. So yeah, highly recommend it for everybody who's listening, man. And thank you for just bringing so much additional context and personal stories and even indulging some of my own goals and dreams and personal things that I'm going through here, man. It was just an absolute joy of a conversation.
Yeah, likewise. It felt really, it was really fun. Organic. I love you have such a good way of like teasing out really practical things. And I really enjoyed that. You like pressed me on some good stuff and I appreciate that. You know, that's awesome. I always enjoy that stuff. Dude. Puts me on my toes. You know?
Yeah. Well, thank you, man. Thank you so much. All right, that wraps things up with Zen Master Francis Sanzaro. Thank you, Francis, so much for joining the show here. Man, I got so much out of this conversation and also so much out of this book of yours, The Zen of Climbing. If you all want to check out that book or anything else that Francis is doing, I'll put some links in the show notes for you. And also, I've got a bonus episode here with Francis. We talked for a while longer on a bunch of different topics, including how to manage fear, how to improve performance, some specific things about essentially getting better at climbing by implementing some of these tools that we touched on in this conversation here. And I'm going to hold that one. Actually, I'm going to release it as a bonus episode in a couple of weeks. I'm not looking at my calendar right now, but it'll be in a couple of weeks. That's going to come out as a bonus episode. And so I'll tell you more about how to access that in a second, coming aboard and supporting as a Patreon or Apple subscriber. But anyway, that's some really good stuff. And I'll do an Instagram post when that comes out. I just need a little bit more time to turn that episode around. So for you Patreon members, you got some good stuff coming your way. And because I didn't do a little update at the beginning of the episode, I'll give you one right now. If you're still listening and you care what's going on in my climbing life, I'll tell you what. I've been struggling. The struggle makes us stronger. I keep reminding myself that, my motto over here is that the struggle makes us stronger. But yeah, I've been struggling with my training. I've been putting such a focus on my bouldering. I've got this road, kind of the two-pronged, the road to the pyramid and the road to V8. And so Francis, of course, would say, don't go for a grade. And so I'm trying to identify climbs and honestly just like specific moves, different positions and things that I can do as a climber to get better and help me achieve what ultimately may be this V8 that I'm going to be going for. But anyway, I've been putting such a focus on that I've definitely let a little bit of the route fitness, kind of my bread and butter as a Red River Gorge climber, go to the wayside a bit. Not totally. Coach Eric Hurst has made it very clear that I need to keep at least one day in of route type fitness, whether that's 2 minutes on, 2 minutes off on a tread wall or doing auto belay routes at the gym or just getting out to the red. And hopefully I'm getting out to the red. And that's what I've been trying to do. The spring's a little hit and miss. I got out and it was like 19 degrees one day and the rock was too cold to do anything on. And then I went out like 2 days later and it was 60 degrees. And so that's just kind of the whipsaw that we're in over here in Kentucky. But I'm trying to keep the goal. So I'll talk more about that in my end of month training plug episodes. Those are free for Patreon members and there's a free tier for you there. So like even if you don't want to pay or can't pay, you can still sign up and get access to those episodes where I just kind of riff about my training and what I'm doing. So I'll give a full update there. But I think as we get closer now into spring send season, if you will, I may boost up the endurance training a little bit to top that off, and the power endurance, hold off on some of the hardest bouldering, and then pick that back up over the summer. So the main bouldering road will be over the summer. But I really do want to perform and have some great days at the Red this spring. So probably start shifting my sights towards that now that we're getting these good days in. And I'm going to be using a lot of what Francis talked about here today to help me through that training and performance journey. I'm so psyched to be diving into it. Now, if you'd like to see the uncut video of this chat, plus score instant access to more than 100 hours of amazing bonus content, and I'm talking about episodes with the likes of Adam Andra, Hazel Finley, Alex Honnold, Magnus Mitbo, Chris Sharma, Allison Vest, and so many more amazing athletes and coaches, well, you can get it all right now for about the price of a beer each month. And I gotta tell you, I could go for a beer right now because I've been working really hard out here in the podcast/utility closet. So if you are in a position to buy me one of those ice cold beers, it would be so rad. There's also a free trial happening right now, so if you want to date me a little bit before you buy me that beer, I get it. You can listen to all that bonus content for free and then stick around if you like it. Just swing on over to patreon.com/The Struggle Climbing Show to get access to that full library right now. Or if you're an iPhone person, you can subscribe right there in your Apple podcast player. Thank you so much. Huge thanks and appreciation to our show sponsors who have brought you this episode at zero cost. Check your show notes for the links and special discounts to those brands that are only available to Struggle listeners. And by the way, you can see all of the show's awesome sponsors and special deals by just popping over to thestruggleclimbingshow.com/deals. Hey, did you know that The Struggle's carbon neutral in partnership with the Honnold Foundation? They are just doing amazing work to bring clean energy to communities around the world. You can get inspired by their latest grant recipients over at honnoldfoundation.org, and then just toss them some love if you can, even a few bucks a month. They're doing such cool and impactful work. And lastly, The Struggle is a proud member of the Plugtone Audio Collective, a diverse group of the best, most impactful podcasts in the outdoor industry. This show was produced and hosted by me, Ryan Devlin, and edited by Glen Walker. All right, that clips the anchors on this episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you liked it, and if you like this show just in general, would you consider sharing it with your climbing friends? The more who listen, the closer that I will get to making this my full-time gig, which would be so cool. So thank you in advance for sharing this episode and also rating and reviewing it if you got a hot second. Really appreciate you. I hope your training and your climbing are going great. And if you're struggling like me, well, at least the struggle makes us stronger. I'll see you soon.